All right, great. Hi, everyone. So thank you very much for showing up. Flew all the way over here yesterday. So my presentation is roughly going to be 20 to 25 minutes. I believe it's going to be filmed, so hopefully a lot of people get value out of this. And so the title of my presentation is like Lessons from Silicon Valley, how to get into 500 startups, or Y Combinator, or Techstars, or AngelPad. And the reality is, I think as an accelerator program, how you get into accelerator program, all the lessons and all this framework is exactly the same as actually how you get an investment. So this is the way I think about it. All right, let's jump into this. So this is I always have my established credibility slide, so make sure my street cred of a Silicon Valley guy. So I've lived in Silicon Valley now for about 15 years, so I'm a lot older than I actually look. Everyone thinks I look like 18 or 19 or something, so like, who the hell are you to go and do this talk, and what's your cred? So I'm a partner at 500 Startups. I run the San Francisco office, and I'm one of the investment partners for the main fund. I mentored about 20 plus different startup accelerators in Asia, Europe, and Israel. And I sit on the board and advisory boards of about 8 plus companies. And I was at Yahoo for about 10.5 years as an executive, so I can pretty much tell companies how not to run a company. And before that, I was spent 2 years at an e-commerce startup where I ran online marketing. We raised probably about $35 million. This is back in 99, 2000. So $35 million is actually not a lot, at that time was not a lot of money, but we actually were able to waste it completely. But you learn a lot as well too, so a lot of great lessons. All right, so 500 Startups, a small group, so I feel very close to all of you. Who here has heard of 500 Startups? Okay, so like half the room. Great, we have not done our job. 500 Startups, we've been around for about 5 years. We're a seed stage VC fund. An accelerator program. We've invested in close to 1,050 companies worldwide. 300 of those companies have actually outside of the US. 300 of these companies as well too that we invested in, both from the accelerator and seed, were actually started by women, sort of founders or co-founders. So this is something we're very, very proud of. And so this guy at the bottom here, Dave McClure, hopefully you guys know him. He's the guy who invented sort of R metrics, PayPal Mafia, and probably I would argue one of the best sort of super angel and one of the best early stage investors in my opinion. Of course I'm biased in the Valley, he's my boss, so I have to say nice things. All right. So he says this thing, which is accelerators are the new MBA, right? And I actually firmly believe this. I was like, why the hell would you waste your money? And I apologize, I swear every once in a while. I speak very, very quickly, and my talks turn into very angry rants from stupid things that I see in the Valley and actually worldwide. So I'm gonna apologize at a time. But it's true, accelerators are the new MBA. Why the hell would you waste your time and money going to do an MBA program when you can do a startup, join a startup accelerator if you're lucky enough to get in, and they give you money to actually run a company, right? Like that's the best way to learn. Why would you go spend $120,000 and go to some bullshit university like Harvard Business School or Stanford Business School and learn stuff that is completely impractical, right? And be in debt. It's a little bit biased. MBAs are worthless too, by the way. So, and so accelerators, right? These are, obviously biased, or in my opinion, 4 of the best accelerator programs on the fucking planet, right? Y Combinator, who are kind of frenemies of ours. We invest in a lot of Y Combinator companies through a seed fund. I think we invest in about 90 Y Combinator companies, so we compete with them on the accelerator side, but we actually invest from a seed investment side in the fund. Techstars, AngelPad, who's awesome, based in San Francisco and New York, and of course 500 Startups. I run the San Francisco office and the San Francisco Accelerator for 500 Startups, and I am recruiting for the next batch, which starts in July. So if anyone's interested in working on something cool, please talk to me afterwards. All right. And so the biggest part, this is from Kevin Hale, who's a sharp, sharp guy. He was a very successful entrepreneur, now a partner at Y Combinator. The most important thing is the clarity of the idea. Okay, what the fuck does this mean? The whole point about this is to know exactly what you're working on, be able to describe this very, very clearly. And I'll go into this. So this is actually a challenge. I think this is something that I think Americans do a very, very good job. I'm Canadian, right? I'm Canadian and American, so I say this as an inside sort of outsider. You guys know Pixar, right? Pixar, which is amazing, amazing sort of like film studio, now part of Disney. You've all seen their movies. And I think when you ask people like, what makes like a Pixar movie like amazing? And it's actually not the animation, right? Animation's great, but when they actually work on a movie, 80% of the time, energy, and effort is actually spent on the story, the plot, right? I think you all saw, hopefully you saw Keith Tier's awesome presentation earlier this morning where he had a whole section just on storytelling. And I think this is actually incredibly important. When you're selling the future, your ability to tell a story, talk about something that is sort of the future that's not unseen yet, is really critical. And this is what I like about sort of like Pixar, and this is actually what the best startup pitches are actually about, telling the story, right? And this is actually something, frankly speaking, like outside of the US, like in Canada, in Europe, in Poland, storytelling sucks. And so I meet lots and lots of European startups, I meet lots of Canadian startups, I meet lots of Asian startups, and the biggest part is because they cannot tell a story, I lose interest. And sometimes that's not necessarily fair, but you have to make it easy. A lot of times you assume as an investor, right, whether I'm a seed investor or I'm evaluating a company for Accelerator, you think I know everything. I'm an idiot, right? Most investors are idiots. Learn to tell a story because you have to make me not think, right? You have to tell a story that's so compelling that it's like, yes, I believe you, even though you've built nothing, right? And so your ability to tell a story is really crucial. The other part is articulation of the problem you're solving. How many times have actually had people show up and you're like, okay, so you're doing this thing, like, what is the problem that you're fixing, right? There's this common sort of quote or term in Silicon Valley, you know, are you building an aspirin or a vitamin, right? You know, the aspirin is like solving a real pain versus a vitamin, which actually is fine. Vitamins, which is gaming, could be other entertainment type things, that's fine. But I think you need to have a very clear idea of what is the thing that you are fixing, right? What is a problem you are solving and who's the end customer? I'm gonna go into that, all right. The other part is size of the market. You know, we're a VC fund, right? Like, you know, and I would say the problem that I see as well too, any times when people are actually pitching me, is that a lot of times, like, they could be awesome businesses, but they're actually not huge markets. So we had a pitch yesterday at Open Reactor, not gonna say who they are, like, oh, we have a customer base of like 1 million people, and it's like, great, like that's probably an interesting business, but I won't care, right? Like 1 million people versus 1 million companies are two very different things. Because for us as investors, if you understand sort of VC economics, we want to invest in businesses and markets that, like, you know, billions of dollars, right? Not like $1 million, which is also awesome, right? It's a great small business. But I think the main point I'm making is that less than 1% of businesses out there are VC fundable. And that's okay, right? So the point I'm trying to make is, like, you know, stop reading all this like TechCrunch startup porn. Sorry to John Biggs over here who I love TechCrunch. But I think a lot of times, like tech startups, whether you're going to do something very big or not, like most businesses are actually not meant to get VC money. And that's okay. The point I'm trying to make is that understand if you're going after a large market, then sometimes it's actually, you should be talking to VCs. If you're going after a relatively small market, there's nothing wrong with that, but VCs are the wrong way to actually get money. And I think validation, just because you raise VC money, doesn't necessarily, a lot of people are trying to raise VC money because they think of it as validation, as opposed to, is there really a business there? And so, size of the market is really important. And this goes back to my first point too, of investors being idiots, right? Myself included. A lot of times we are not experts in your market, so you need to be able to tell the story, and you need to have data and facts to actually back up how big this market is. And you need to educate us. The other part is, what's your secret, right? So yes, like there's a big market, here's the problem you're trying to solve, but like what is a unique insight that you have in this market, right? We're not experts. So what makes you different? Why are you tackling this market? What is your unique secret? And I think that's actually the, you know, this goes back to sort of Keith's earlier sort of presentation about like the storytelling piece of like, here's sort of like why this thing needs to exist. Or at least, yes, there's all these players doing this, but here's sort of the angle that I'm actually looking at it. And here's sort of what we can do that's going to be very different than anybody else. And the other part that I see a lot is, you know, your ability to answer questions in a very tight, concise, and crisp way. We do not want these long, rambling questions, right? Like, this isn't school. Time is of money. This is something we value, at least I value, my firm values a lot, is your ability to answer questions. And if you don't know the answer, like, it's okay. I think how we want to understand how you answer sort of our questions is actually your thinking process and your framework of actually how you look at these type of problems, right? And if you don't know the answer, don't lie and make it up. Be honest and say, hey, I don't know the answer. Let me get back to you, because there's nothing worse than people making up shit and then we just call you and we think you're an idiot, right? Or a liar. Competition. I cannot talk about this enough about you really need to understand competition. And competition could be people who are doing something exactly what you're working on or going after the same sort of like problem. Or it could be like laziness, right? Like there's a lot of new products and things that you're building where a lot of times your biggest competition is actually like the old ways of doing stuff or people's innate laziness. And you have to be able to articulate and talk about this, right? Like who's the competition? And a lot of times when somebody shows up and we talk about this thing, they're like, who's your competition? We don't have competition. For me, I'm either sitting there thinking, okay, this guy's an idiot because he either has not done his homework, right? Or the second part, there's no competition. A lot of times it means there's actually no real market for this. All right? Does this make sense so far? Good. So in line with competition, differentiation, right? So yes, there's competition. How are you different and better than your competition? What are you doing different than your competition, right? And you go, okay, well, what's the point about this? Is that I think this is something you have to think very, very clear about. Are there specific product features? Is it what you're doing, some different strategy? Is it your sort of marketing acquisition? Like this is incredibly important, differentiation. And I think, you know, and this, I think this comes naturally in the US, where in the US is, I think it's one of the most like over-marketed places on the planet. So like every day, I think in the United States, like every American sees something like 3,000 marketing messages every single day, right? That's equivalent like walking through Times Square, like that you're just inundated with ads, right? And advertisements and sales pitches every single day. And so your ability to stand out against this is really, really critical. And the other part is hustle and sense of urgency. I did a big rant yesterday at Open Reactor, but you know, not an issue generally speaking here in Central and Eastern Europe. Actually tends to be more of an issue, in my opinion, in Western Europe and in Canada. People there are just not necessarily as hungry, and this is something I like a lot. Like I like a lot about like Central Eastern European startups, Northern Asian startups in general. They're just really, really hungry, and they have great, great work ethic. And I think this is one of the big things for a lot of people who are not raised in Silicon Valley, of just incredible competition and speed of how stuff is actually done in Silicon Valley, is you need to sort of raise your game and be the sense of urgency. The only advantage that you actually have as a startup, it's not money, and a lot of times it's not even resources, and you also don't have a lot of time, so that's why you have to make decisions very, very quickly, right? Nothing bothers me more when in my accelerator, I run 2 accelerator programs a year in San Francisco, so we get about, I think it's close to about 800 to 1,100 applications for about 30 to 40 spots, so it's fairly competitive. And one thing that drives me berserk, because I spend 4 months with these people, of just like they spend 2 weeks trying to figure out their name, right, to change their name. I'm like, this is really not the biggest factor, and you're wasted 2 weeks out of a 4-month program to go and figure out your name. Like, that's dumb, right? And for me, those are signals that these guys are not working on the right thing, and they're not going to be successful. So hustle and sense of urgency. And I talked a lot about, there's this Polish company I like a lot, like UXPin, Martin from UXPin. Like this guy is a complete hustler. He spent like 9 months like traveling between Poland and Silicon Valley, like almost every single month, going and meeting, going to every single networking event and talking to people, talking to investors, getting feedback, which is why he was able to raise like a good round in the US, right? He had a great product, but I think the fact is like having a great product is just given. I think is a given right now. Your ability to go and hustle and actually build a network and get people on your side, that's something he did a great job of, and there's a lot to learn from him. I'm a huge fan of what they're doing. Unfortunately, not investor. But anyways, they're awesome. Customer sets and understanding, right? Huge, huge part. Do you understand or at least have a hypothesis on who your customer segment is, right? Are you going after 18 to 25-year-old females? Are you going after SMBs? Are you going after enterprise? Having a very, very clear hypothesis on your customer base is very, 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 very critical. I cannot state this enough, right? You need to have a good understanding of who your customer segment is. Even if it's a hypothesis, at least you have a starting point. I can't tell you how many people where I meet them and they're like, so who's your customer? It's like, I don't know. And I'm like, or it's everybody. That's even worse answer. Yes? Oh, sure. Okay, sorry about that. I just get so excited about what I talk about, so all right. So I'll slow down a little bit more. Is this okay? All right. And so this is from Felix Dennis, right? I think having a great idea is vastly overrated. I know it sounds crazy and counterintuitive, I don't think it matters what the idea is most. You need great execution. Every time I come out to this region, I spend a lot of time in Central, Eastern Europe, in Southeast Asia, in Latin America, in North Asia, and the question that drives me the most berserk, this is my rant part of my talk, is, you know, I don't really want to share with you my total idea because I'm scared that somebody's going to steal it. Like, that's the most fucking retarded thing I've actually heard you know, and they're like, oh, well, I don't want to launch this, somebody's going to steal my idea. It's like, somebody's going to steal your idea and copy it. It probably isn't that good of an idea and you have nothing defensible, so that's just stupid. And the second part that's also stupid about is how you actually can get customer user feedback. Because at the end of the day, you have nothing until you launch your product, right? It's all execution. And this is like a very stupid VC question. It's like, oh, well, what happens if Facebook or Google actually go and like work on my, you know, go and like take my product and idea? Do you know how many times like Facebook has actually attacked Snapchat? 3 times, right? They've built these Snapchat clones and they've all been fucking disastrous, right? And this is my opinion, the difference of a large company versus a startup. Startups have a sense of urgency, the speed of decision making, and they're hugely and really, really focused on the problem and focused on that product. And when you're a large company, you're big, you're dumb, you're stupid, and you're unfocused. And most of the time, very rarely, are large, you know, do you die because of competition? Most of the time, you die because of your own stupidity and lack of actually taking execution and action, all right? So the point about this is the idea, you know, for all those who actually hear, idea means nothing, all right? It's all about execution. Think about this, all right? So anybody who comes to me and goes like, hey, you know, I want to get your feedback on this idea, it's like, I actually don't care about your idea. Give me some data, right? Have you launched this product? What are your users and what are your customers saying? That's actually more important. So I talked about this, data and traction. Keith said this thing earlier where it's like mediocre VCs like care a lot about traction. Okay, I guess I'm a mediocre VC. What do I know, right? We only have 3 unicorns in our fund, so we're probably clearly a mediocre VC. My perspective is it depends, all right? So this is not a fight, but it's a counter argument against that term, right? It depends. If you're a mobile app and you have like, you know, it's really challenging now where there's close to 1 million apps in the Apple App Store in the US, right? I think over 1 million apps. And so for me, it's like, I don't care if you don't have a product, like it's really, really important that you have some data. I'm not looking for 1 million downloads. Maybe it's 35,000 downloads, or maybe it's 50,000 downloads, or maybe it's 100,000 downloads, but some data that I can extrapolate out to a larger market is really, really, really important. In my opinion too, as a business-to-business company, the traction piece is that I don't want like 100 sort of like, 100 paying customers. Maybe it's 10 paying customers. But especially B2B, if your customer is not paying for your product, you have nothing. If you're offering your product for free as a B2B, as a B2B product and B2B company, you have nothing. All right? Because the reality is that businesses have money. If you're solving a real problem, they'll pay for it, right? I don't know if they'll pay a lot for it, but they'll pay for it. Charging some amount of money or some type of traction for this is actually really critical, right? So I don't necessarily agree that it's just like having traction means that you're a weak investor. I think having some traction, depending on the business, right? Like for example, if it's like a very, very crowded space, you need to have traction, in my opinion. If it's a brand new area, like in lines of sort of like something like he talks about, sort of in between sort of like the present and the future, like that makes sense. If you're opening up a brand new category, that makes sense, right? But if you're in an area where like, oh, I'm a mobile gaming app, and we don't invest in mobile gaming apps, of course, because they suck. But it's just like, that space is horrible. But the point I'm trying to make is you're a mobile gaming app where there are literally thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of gaming apps, and you don't have at least 1 million downloads, like I don't know any investor is going to look at that because you need this data points, all right? And the other part we care a lot about is customer acquisition and unit economics, all right? Unit economics, for example, is like, so I paid, I'm making these numbers up, $5 to get every single user, but I know lifetime value of this user is going to be like $50 or $100 or even $7, whatever it is. Having a good understanding of what the unit economics could be is really, really important. What is your customer acquisition strategy, right? How did you get your customers? And how does this actually scale, all right? Or if it doesn't scale, that's okay, but we like to understand how you're thinking about this problem. I think too many times people care about like, oh, I have this great product, and this is like the worst thing I hear too, is like, oh, we've got like 1,000 users and we didn't spend any money. We didn't spend any money marketing getting these users. I'm like, okay, great. So that basically means you have no idea what you're doing, right? That means you have no idea, you're banking on luck. For me, it's about sustainability, right? How do you get these customers, and is this scalable and repeatable? So this is actually something you need to think about, and you do not need to spend a lot of money to test, and you do not need to spend a lot of money to figure this out, or at least to have a general idea or a hypothesis of what this could be. All right. And one thing we also look for as well too is balanced teams. One of the great things about Poland and the Polish startup and sort of ecosystem is that there is a lot of really great tech talent here. Design talent's getting better, but on the business and sales and marketing side sucks. It's horrible here. And this isn't just Poland, right? This isn't Poland, it's just Eastern Europe or Central Europe. It sucks in Canada too, right? And I'm Canadian, I can say that, right? It's pretty horrible. And having these balanced teams is really important. Doing startups is really hard. Right? I think it's one of the hardest things you can possibly do. But what makes balanced teams important is because having somebody who's like, we talk about the hacker, the hipster, and the hustler, this is a trifecta in our opinion. And being a co-founder in a company or doing a startup is a very lonely thing in the leadership position. So having people go through it with you, we think is important. And we think having these balanced teams, at least what we see, like we've invested in single founders, and there's a lot of awesome single founders out there that have done really well. But in most cases, if you look at a lot of the really big companies, whether it's Google, Yahoo, that's been my experience, and all the great companies, in my opinion, have been like there've been 2 co-founders or 3 co-founders. LinkedIn as well too. Like these are all companies where there are like multiple co-founders, because it's a tough game to build a company for the next 5, 7, 10 years. And one thing we look at particularly, I would say more in our accelerator than sort of the seed fund, even though I think it's relevant, is a cultural fit. Because at least in the accelerator, I have to spend 4 months with these people. So if somebody's an asshole or a douchebag, it's a painful 4 months. And they actually do not fit very well with our culture, at least, right? And so for us is that we value hustlers a lot in the 500 startup, sort of, at least in our culture, versus in Y Combinator. They look for the really geeky, technical sort of person, and that's awesome, right? Like, because they have awesome companies coming into there, so clearly works for them. So really, for me, it's like really understanding, like, as an investor, but also for yourself, is there fit for the values of actually what this accelerator, what this investor is, or Techstars or AngelPad or whatever, like really dig into it and talk to people that they've actually invested in before to see if there is a cultural fit with them. And this is for you and for us as well too, because it's like this is a long-term relationship, right? And when you're working with your investor, like it's like you're getting married, and it's really hard to get divorced. At least when you get married, you can actually divorce them, right? If stuff is not working, it's really challenging getting money from an investor and you don't like them or there's not a cultural fit, pretty hard to get rid of them. And I'd say last of all is really the vision piece. Is this something, all these things I talk about, right? Story, the competition, the team, right? Like, why are they uniquely qualified? This all needs to be put together, and ultimately, like, is this a big vision, right? So think about these awesome companies like Google, right? Like, organizing the world's information, or Facebook, which is about, their vision is about connecting the world, right? Connecting people in the world. Yahoo, actually they didn't have a vision, which is why Yahoo's all fucked up, right? And I would argue that's probably AOL as well too. Or the other one is Airbnb. They have a very clear vision about hosts, right? And this vision actually drives a lot of what they do, how they recruit, how the investors that they've actually gotten, right? The partnerships that they actually make. So there's this one company I talk a lot about, Neighborly. So I invested in them in my last accelerator batch, which was batch 12, batch 10. So this was last year. And what I loved about this guy, he was MIT grad, had deep expertise in municipal bonds. And what I liked about them was that his goal was to democratize municipal bonds. So what is a municipal bond? Let me explain. So in the US, when, say, I live in San Francisco, and you're looking to build a road, you basically sell bonds. The problem on Wall Street now is that, and I hate Wall Street. I literally hate Wall Street. They're all just scumbag iBankers who basically are just middlemen who extract value. What these guys do in the old days, these municipalities would sell directly these bonds to people like you and myself, right? To people in the neighborhood. But over time, Wall Street has kind of taken that over. And so what has happened is that as a middleman, they're extracting massive value, and they're basically ripping off the cities and ripping off like the end consumer, usually myself, where I have to go buy these bonds from, from banks who are basically marking them up dramatically. His vision was like, I am going to disintermediate all these banks and to basically allow municipalities to raise more money, right? So that's a benefit for municipalities. And for me, as like an end investor, to basically invest directly and not have to pay as much, right? And which is a great thing. And so this goal is like, I think that's a vision worth fighting for. And so for me, when you're working on a startup, it's like, what is the vision, the big vision, right, that you're fighting for that makes it easier to get investors as well too? And so, this is from David Tisch. He used to run, he's out of New York, an investor out of New York, and he used to run Techstars New York. He said, the majority of accelerators are not good for companies that are failed. There's a lot of them, and the idea of applying to just any accelerator is just silly. I don't say it's stupid, right? You got to do your homework and figure out which one is the right one for you, right? And this is the same thing, whether it's an accelerator, whether it's a VC fund, or it's an investor, like figure out which one is the best fit for you. Don't just apply for a whole bunch of them and hope to get in. It should be the exact same way. If you are going to waste your time and go to business school, figure out which is the right business school for you, or whatever you're looking at, right? Like understand if there's fit. And so anyways, this is my presentation. I just look at the time, and actually 30 minutes, actually pretty good. Thank you very much for your time.
Yep. Yeah, you actually were very good with that. So I'll open the floor for questions because you have some time, and I know that some people already were mentioning and making comments on your talk on Twitter. Who has a question? Prepare them, and I'll open maybe for 5 or 6.
How many companies from Eastern Europe do you have in 500 startups in Accelerator, and how does it work, the acceleration program for those companies?
Yeah, so the question is how many companies in the Accelerator from Eastern? Last batch we had a Polish company. So we have companies, usually every batch at least 1 or 2, to be honest. I think we're under index. I don't think that we get enough, and because I think the reality is a lot of Polish or Czech or Russian or et cetera, companies are actually not necessarily applying. So this is actually why I travel out here a lot and try to hunt for companies too. So we actively recruit, but we actually don't get a lot of applications from the region, unfortunately.
Is there a reason for that?
I have no idea. Yeah, I guess we just aren't doing a good enough job promoting it. I don't know.
Well, you were here pretty much a lot of time here in Eastern Europe. Who wants over there? Let me come to you, sir. Here you
go. You mentioned Marcin Trader, who was doing lots of hustling at the beginning. Obviously, this was successful for him. But what would be your advice to founders, hustling and attending events versus actually spending time building the product?
Yeah, I think it's a balance, but I think that's one thing where he had a team, right? He had a bunch of co-founders. So he had co-founders who were working on the product and the business, and a lot of what he was doing was just networking, talking to potential investors, getting introductions as well too, and also getting feedback, like actually getting live market feedback and also talking to customers. One of the things, I remember somebody did a presentation yesterday, which is like so spot on, which is, I think the smartest, in my opinion, the smartest people who hustle, like you actually, when you're trying to get customers, go after customers who actually have raised VC money, because word gets around, so you're not just getting customers, you're also getting potential investors, right? Because investors hear about this, like, oh, that's actually really interesting. And he was doing a lot of that. I don't know if he was doing that intentionally or not, but he did a lot of that. And he, I remember meeting him. It was an introduction from, I couldn't remember who made an introduction from him, but he was getting introductions from all these different people and just having coffee and talking about them. Here's what I'm doing. Who should I talk with? What do you think? And he was just being really smart about that, right? And not being aggressive about actively pitching, but really more about soliciting feedback and just becoming friends with people. Smart. Like that's long-term greedy.
To quote the great John Biggs, there's only one letter difference between networking and not working. I saw a question. Where was he? Here?
Hi Marvin, thank you for coming and thank you for the great talk. My question is, do 500 startups accept any non-tech fashion startups?
No.
Well, that was simple. Are you only looking for companies that actually have a technology behind it? Basically.
I mean, we're software fund, so and we do some hardware, but we kind of suck at hardware, if I'm honest.
Okay. Anyone else with a question? I saw over there. Let me run towards you. Thank you, sir.
And what about companies who don't target US, at least?
Yeah, we invest in companies that don't target the US market. And so out of the 30% of our international companies, I'd say half of them target the US market, like, or global market, and half of them are regional.
Hi. I heard you say, and I agree, that Polish companies struggle with the hustle part of the cycle. Do you think it's good for Polish companies to try to outsource that to somewhere like the US and build their sales team there, or that they can do it here internally?
Yeah, so I think it depends, right? I think it depends on the stage that you're at. I actually think in the beginning, your first couple sales, like let's say you're B2B, right? Your first sales should be done by the co-founding team because it's a discovery process. I firmly believe that. Then once you've kind of established a sales process, that might be the time that you start to outsource it. But my view where, like, I think if you outsource it too early, you're outsourcing your learning.
Anyone else? Oh, I see over there. I have to run, do some exercise. Don't worry, I'm coming to you.
You said that we shouldn't apply to all accelerators, but to the best one. What is good accelerator for you?
So I would say it's the best one for you. There's a lot of good accelerator programs, like horizontal programs, which is basically means they take most type of companies like Y Combinator, us, Techstars, AngelPad, mainly software. So like, we invest in marketplace businesses, B2B, business to consumer, like all different kinds, like ed tech and ad tech, whatever. Versus say like hardware accelerators, like there's vertical accelerators like Highway 1.
But I wanted to know what are the features of good accelerator.
Yeah. So I think having a good brand name, I think people who run the accelerator are people who've actually done startup stuff, who are very qualified, good mentor network. Are their companies able to raise money later on? So they have good relationships with downstream capital. What other things do I look at? And just a big alumni, I think, is also really helpful. So community. So yeah, that's my perspective, and deep expertise in whatever they're investing in.
I saw another question over there. Please.
During the 4 months that you're in the accelerator process, what do you think is the biggest problem that most startups, that the make or break point or something?
Boy, that's a long answer, but I think the biggest
you have
part.
time, don't worry, go ahead.
I think the biggest issue for a lot of folks who go to accelerator program, they don't manage their time very well. So I tell my teams when they come into my program to just like have a daily, weekly, and monthly plan, right? Also understand what exactly you want to get out of the program, what are the metrics you're looking at, and be very religious about actually going after that, right? So is your goal a fundraising goal? Is it more a traction, customer acquisition goal? Maybe it's both. What is the thing you want to learn from the program? And I think too many people waste a lot of time in the accelerator program. I get very frustrated and I kick their ass, but ultimately it's their company, right? So if you want to fuck it up, like it's your problem. It's not my, and that's actually a good signal for me. It's just like that basically means you're not going to make it, right? Like the reality is that most of the companies we expect in our portfolio, seed and accelerator, 60% of our companies go to 0 at least. So that's actually the game, right? We expect most of the returns from 5% of our company.
When you say that they have to, make sure that their goals are aligned with, do they have goals actually before coming, or are they changing when they're coming?
Sometimes you have to, right? Where you just, as you're discovering, you're realizing, well, like this market I'm going after is actually either one, I'm not that interested or passionate about, or number two, like there's actually no real market here. So, and the product seems like it's interesting, but we should probably pivot and do something different. It does happen.
In the program?
Yeah, it does happen.
Okay. Anyone else has questions? I had seen a hand before, but I'm not sure. We still have 5-10 minutes, so otherwise, yes, no. Oh, Keith, please.
I just wonder, so I've known Dave forever, Dave McClure, and I've noticed 500 Startups has evolved quite a bit itself. Maybe you can talk about the key evolutions. One I noticed is the word traction does come in now to play quite a big role in the application process. And that obviously is driven by some experience. So can you speak to what you've seen and how you've changed?
Yeah, so what we found is in a 4-month accelerator program, I'll give you some stats of our accelerator in general, right? So we have usually between 30 to 30, at least in this batch I'm trying to do 40 companies, but it's usually 30 to 35 companies. Out of these 30 to 35 companies, we do not take any pre-launch companies because one of the things that we've decided to focus on, we actually focus a lot on distribution, which is online marketing and sales process, and it's pretty hard to help companies, at least for us, if you don't actually have a product. So every time we've taken in an early stage, a super early stage company with no real product or they haven't launched yet, we just aren't able to help them very much. So we've kind of gone a little bit more upstream. Something between 25 to 40% of the companies who come into our program have actually been through another accelerator program already, just as a stat. And this has actually happened over the last year and a half. So this is relatively new because I think what's happening is just as I can't take in credit for this, but as our brand name and as our program has gotten better and we've learned a lot over the time, we've actually found that where we've differentiated or where we can actually help the companies the most is distribution, sales and marketing. And you can't help them very much if you don't have a product. So if you come in with no product, the 4-month is wasted, right? So then the demo day, we've just launched, you have nothing. It's really challenging. So that's actually being a big part. And so every batch we have between 5 to 7 companies that have over $1 million in revenue come into our program. And we've been able to do this because I think as we've gotten more, applications, we can be more selective. I think the first couple batches, we're at batch 14, which starts in July, we've been able to ramp up, right? And because of this, we can be way more selective because we're getting more applications. In batch 1 or 2, nobody knew who we were, so we kind of had to take anybody. And so that's actually been one of the benefits of being around and hopefully starting to churn out some very good companies. So hopefully that answers the question. Sort of?
Sort of?
Yeah.
You want to follow
Sort
up?
of? If I did.
So it does answer the question, and I think it makes total sense. It does, intuitively I notice a trend. For example, you will know Jeff Clavier at Softtech VC.
Yeah, he's a good friend.
So Jeff doesn't do seed anymore.
Yeah, he's post-seed.
So basically, the trend seems to be that the guys that used to do seed are really becoming the new venture. And then it leaves open the question, who's going to do seed?
I mean, you're starting to see some firms so K9 is doing what they call pre-seed, right? There's a bunch of new sort of pre-seed guys. I think angels are also moving up as well too. So I actually think there's not an issue in the seed sort of level. The issue, like you said, is actually in the series A, B, and C. And I would argue seed is a new series A, right? The traction we're looking at of what I invested in now is completely different. And I'm talking from a seed fund, not even the accelerator, from a seed fund of the type of companies I'm looking at of traction, of what I look at as traction now versus even 2 years ago. Really different. It's just you're seeing, because there's so many seed so many seed companies out there now that you can actually afford to sort of move up a little bit more. I don't know if that's good or bad, but it is a trend, for sure.
Alice, you wanted a question or not? Yes?
There's nobody else. We have time, so go ahead. Something that I've noticed is around the region and many events and many conferences, there are still a lot of people saying that you don't have to go to Silicon Valley. You can stay here in Europe. And I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of companies are not going for it and applying to such programs. Could you say, I don't know, two, 3 things why, I think that there's a lot of Polish startups here, why they should actually go for it and apply and stop just themselves short?
Yeah, so I'm biased, of course, right? And I'm one of the first where it's I don't think I don't think in most cases it makes sense for companies to go to Silicon Valley just for the sake of going. It's freaking expensive. But the benefit of being in Silicon Valley is you're surrounded by a lot of really smart, experienced people. And there's a saying which is you become the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. I think the quality of the conversations you have in Silicon Valley are unparalleled. Learning how to scale, there's literally, I think that's a big issue in a lot of ecosystems where, in my opinion, getting to product market fit is a problem. And the second part is actually, if you're lucky enough to get to product market fit, is actually scaling your business. There are so many people in Silicon Valley who have lots of experience scaling organizations and businesses. And that's helpful, just being around these people and your access to, the access to people that, when you're in the valley for a long time is amazing. You're like 2 or 3 degrees separation. So the quality of the conversations, the sense of urgency you get because it's just so competitive. And I also think the willingness of people to help you, I think, is unparalleled. There's an abundance thinking in Silicon Valley that doesn't exist anywhere else. In most, I would say most ecosystems I go to, and I spend a lot of time traveling, right? In Asia, in Western Europe, in Central, Eastern Europe, everywhere. The problem is this mentality of just like, let's go fight over like the small piece of the pie instead of thinking about like, oh, this is a big massive market. Like, how do we find some way to work together to make this thing bigger? I see too much of the David versus sort of that type of thinking is kind of weak-minded. And I see that a lot in this region. It's like, oh, I don't want to help them because they're kind of competition. And it's like, that's an issue in Canada too. It's a big criticism I have of Canada.
I don't care. I'm taking the executive decision to allow one more question, so go ahead.
Thank you. Somewhat related to that, but long-distance teams, there seems to be a lot of controversy whether that works. You must face that at 500 startups as companies scale. What are your thoughts?
I think it depends on the company. I think it depends on the team. Have they had a background working together? I think it's hard. But having said that, like versus say 5 years ago, I think in my opinion, we don't think it's a big deal having a developer team like overseas because it's just so ridiculously expensive for tech talent in Silicon Valley now. Tech talent tends to be fairly, I would say, overvalued. Like the best people are 10x or 100x versus sort of the next tier of folks, but they're really expensive. But I think the challenge now is the Valley, a lot of the tech talent, and I don't know if you would agree with me, they're really mercenary now and they're very disloyal. And that's kind of a problem. I think like, as I say, it's like mercenaries versus missionaries. There's a lot of mercenaries now, and I think there's a lot to be said about like having an overseas tech team. But to do that, that basically means you have to have a good relationship with that team. You have to be willing to travel. There's a lot of tools now that exist, like Skype, wonderful tools of Skype and Blue Jeans and all these other tools that you can use for the communications piece. So I don't think it's a deal killer anymore, but you have to be on top of being able to sort of just communicating and having good processes in place. And your ability to iterate, it does get in the way, right? So it kind of depends on the stage of where you're at. So it is challenging, but I think it's doable and it's not a deal killer for us. All right.
What is that devilish product you mentioned? Skype? What is that? Yeah. On that, guys, thank you very much, Marvin. Please.
Thank you very much.